This committee meeting to order for May 7th. Would the clerk call the roll?
Yes. Chair Niss,
Here.
Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Tanaka, 2 present.
Okay, thank you. And just as a reminder to people, especially if we've got a large audience watching, that 2 is a quorum currently. So off we go. So tonight, as it says here after call to order, oral communications. I don't see anybody here who would like to orally communicate with us? Okay, apparently not. So going on from there, we have one action item on tonight, an important action item, which is to recommend to the council we approve the 2019 work plan to address the council priority, transportation and traffic. And we'll get to this in a minute, but as you remember, that was one of the 4 priorities that we selected this year. And this one tonight will also include a short discussion about rail. Since I'm recused from rail, this is a very general discussion, and we've discussed earlier that I can be involved in this one tonight because it's so general. So having heard a lot about transportation and traffic and so forth, we have put together the work plan for essentially the coming year. So this is, even though Chantel Gaines is here tonight with us, we are looking at the next year as the year where this is really going to be put into place. So, delighted to be here, and who would like to kick it off? Chantel? Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Good evening. Chantel Gaines. I am an assistant to the city manager here and also filling in as the manager of transportation services while we are actively recruiting for our chief transportation official. I want to take a moment and introduce my team. Wayne Tonda is here. He is a consultant working with us on transportation services, and also Rafael Ruiz is one of our traffic operations leads for the transportation unit. So, all right, so we have a very brief presentation that's reflective of the staff report, but I wanted to give a couple prefacing remarks before jumping in. So the first is just giving the background that this is an overview of the transportation services. So as you know, we have a recommendation in the proposed budget for this to be created as an Office of Transportation as opposed to a division within the Planning and Community Environment Department. So that's a really great move and a large move that's trying to be reflective of the priority that transportation is for this community. So we are making that recommendation in the budget, and this is an overview of what we're imagining the transportation services unit looking like. And also the shift to moving transportation out of PCE into an office of its own with the direct reporting relationship to the city manager is reflective of its importance to the quality of life for Palo Altans and for our community as a whole. The work plan assumes that council approves 2 additional positions in the proposed budget, and we aligned our budget request with trying to move the needle forward towards some of these accomplishments we'll talk about today.
Chantel, what are the 2 new positions going to be called that will be line items?
Yes, I will hit on those in a couple of slides if that's okay.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, the proposed budget, I gave the specific pages here as well as in the staff report. The mission, purpose, and goals stated in the proposed budget are the foundation for this work plan. In prior years' budgets, transportation had one performance metric in the line of different things for PCE, and it wasn't a lot of emphasis on the type of work that transportation focused on. So in the proposed budget, we were able to really flesh out what transportation does. So we put together a mission statement and a purpose, working with staff to be reflective of the work that we do, as well as some of the priorities that we've heard from council. So I'll go into the mission and purpose. As stated in the proposed budget, the mission, I'll read these. I normally don't like reading slides, but I'm going to read these ones. Okay.
I always hope somebody will be watching us.
Awesome.
And I always think, oh, please watch us.
Excellent. So the Office of Transportation's mission is to preserve and enhance the quality of life for Palo Alto residents, visitors, and businesses by providing efficient and cost-effective transportation services for all modes of transportation. Our purpose? The purpose of the Office of Transportation is to improve the safety of all the users of all modes of transportation, reduce reliance on single-occupancy vehicles, address congestion, and reduce through traffic and non-resident parking in Palo Alto neighborhoods, leading to an integrated transportation system that serves local, regional, and intercity travel. We lined up 3 goals in the proposed budget, and those are reflected here. In the budget itself, you'll see some sub-objectives for each of these goals, but the high-level goals are: Goal 1, provide, design, and implement transportation services that meet or exceed the expectations of Palo Alto residents. Encourage transportation alternatives to single-occupancy vehicle trips and improve traffic flow and parking availability. There are a few sub-goals for that, and those sub-goals are based on some of the metrics in the National Citizen Survey. So there's also ways that we're moving towards being a more performance-driven work unit. Goal 2 is ensure that services are delivered efficiently and continue to improve. And Goal 3 is my personal favorite. It's focused on the growth of people, which is really how we encourage better services to be provided through transportation. So increasing the professional capacity of the members of the Office of Transportation. We organize the work that we're doing in about 6 different buckets here, and I realize that the buckets may not necessarily be the most intuitive ones, but we organize it this way to highlight the different types of work that's going on. And we want to maintain progress and complete assignments that are underway, because it is important for us to show results in order to show that we're moving the needle on anything within transportation. So some of the organization is focused on that. So just high level, we'll go over activities previously approved and currently in progress. We'll go over some that are previously approved and being reevaluated in one form or another. Some of the larger initiatives that we have going on within the office. In your report, attachment A summarizes some of the upcoming agenda items. It's not an all-inclusive list, but it gives you a sense of the type of things that will be coming before the City Council in the coming months related to transportation. Also focusing on staff development and recruitment activities, and that's where I'll hit on those staff members. And lastly, it's an other category, and that is encompassing of just things that we understand are happening around us, but we may not necessarily have direct action or resources set for them right now. So the previously approved activities and in progress, our Safe Routes to School team is a very mighty strong team that continues to work on their 5-year plan. I believe they're in year 3. They'll be giving an update, their annual report, to the City School Liaison Committee next week, and they'll be bringing that to full council on June 3rd. The citywide traffic signal operations optimization and upgrades for Middlefield North and other traffic calming improvements. We continue to be responsive as we hear of issues going on in different parts of the community. Middlefield North is a great example of that, working with residents, being responsive to the concerns that were brought up and proposing a pilot program, and then council approved a permanent traffic treatment there, and staff continues to work on that. Another is we're working currently with Crescent Park, being responsive to some of the issues that have come up over time. We've been working with the neighborhood group there to try to address some of their traffic concerns and cut through traffic issues. The bike and scooter share programs, as you know, council extended a pilot program for that. We're finalizing guidelines so that we can actually see some of the devices out on the street and see people potentially considering mode shifts for that last mile. Updating the transportation impact fee, council just approved it, second reading yesterday, and that is great progress happening there. And then lastly, participating in some of the larger projects happening infrastructure-wise in the city, such as the CalAF parking garage and the Charleston Arrestadero corridor project. We have involvement in those projects in different types of ways. Activities previously approved and being reevaluated, just 2 listed here. One of them is the Bike Boulevard implementation and follow-up report, As you may recall, last year, we were implementing the Bike Boulevard project in the Midtown area and completed a lot of those improvements, and we stopped that project at a point and had a discussion with council, a study session, and one of the due-outs from the study session was we would follow up with some data a year later. And so that is around now. We're gathering more information and doing a survey and collecting data, and we're planning to bring that report to council in August. The Embarcadero and El Camino Real Enhanced Bikeway project, that was one that council approved some concept designs for. And because we're looking at different alternatives with grade separation, and this intersection could be one that could be impacted by that, we're actually putting this project on hold so that it can be aligned with what happens with grade separation. And I can answer any questions you guys have on that later. So the big initiative things, as Chairperson Niss mentioned, grade separation is a very big deal, as an understatement. And transportation staff is spending a lot of time on that. We have that as a separate council priority, and the council has adopted a work plan for rail. So that is about the extent that we'll talk about rail today. We have more coming up on Monday. The evaluation and revision of the residential preferential parking permit program. We have Wayne, who did an evaluation of that program, and we're bringing a full discussion to City Council on Monday the 13th as well. A lot of recommendations included in that. It's a holistic 360 review of the RPP program and thus parking in general, and really gives us a good foundation to build from in trying to make some improvements to our parking programs. Institute a revised community engagement process for transportation projects. We want to engage with the community better as a just a basic statement for that. And so we want to come up with a better way to do that. Consider data collection opportunities and increase automated collection systems. We have room as well for better data collection and data-based decision-making. So we are looking at ways that we can enhance that. Staff development and recruitment activities ongoing. We're always looking to develop the staff we have to optimize their abilities and productivity. So looking for any opportunity to do that. Recruitments underway right now are the chief transportation official as well as the senior transportation planner. And then requested in the budget is a parking manager and a senior engineer. The parking manager is intended to be able to provide sort of a strategic outlook on what we're doing with parking, implement some of the recommendations, which we presume will come from the meeting on Monday, as well as able to really be a working manager and help implement a lot of our parking systems and structures. And then for the senior engineer, it will be a leader for our engineering team to be able to provide some guidance to that unit as well, and to help with the implementation of the rail program. The other category, this is our ability to respond to things as they occur. An example is there are things that will come and impact us in one way or another. Artificial intelligence and self-driving vehicles is a great example of that, just being able to be responsive to things that show up. That is one of them, and also different ways of ideas to enhance our transportation ecosystem, but not yet resourced. So we understand that there are interests for us to enhance transportation in many different ways. We want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, that we have a balanced workload that we can actually implement and show accomplishments with. And so this category is kind of knowing that there are other things out there that are not fully reflected in everything else on the work plan, and that we can further discuss those things, but that we want to make sure that we are showing success on some of the bigger bucket things that are already in the works. So with that, just a recap of the recommendation from here. Our recommendation is for this to go to full council for approval, and we are available to answer any questions, my team as well as City Manager, Mr. Shikata.
Thanks, Chantel.
Thank you.
So, those of you sitting here, any comments?
I would only call attention to the obvious that Chantel has stepped into the management and supervision of our transportation staff really in an extraordinary way. She's gotten up to speed quickly and has demonstrated quite a command of the issues we're tackling. Now, as she noted, we are actively recruiting for our next chief transportation official. So the work plan that she just described does presume that we'll be able to fill the position and have obviously also some input from the individual that we would be bringing on board. So just a few kind of variables going forward, but we're on a really stable base based on the work that Chantal and the transportation team have been putting together.
Remind me of when our last chief transportation person left. I wonder if I can just leave it on. Yeah, it's hard to remember to turn it on and off.
So your question was when the last chief transportation official left. It was October 2018.
Okay, so it's been a while, right?
Just a little.
Yeah. Okay, and I know this has been ongoing,
Yes, it is.
so it's not like you're just jumping into it.
Correct.
Right. So you might say something about why is it difficult to find a CTO?
Absolutely. I'd perhaps start with the big picture issues which affect all employers, certainly in Silicon Valley, probably Palo Alto as much, if not more so than most, in terms of the challenge of cost of living, commutes, and as a result, the challenge in attracting candidates from outside of the Bay Area. We've definitely experienced that as an issue across the board for all of our positions. Add to that, the transportation field in and of itself is a really competitive one right now, where there are many opportunities for people who are working in the area. Multiple projects, as you know, significant investment, certainly from both public agencies, the state, and even federal funding for specific projects, but also the private sector and many of the companies investing in their own transportation programs as well. So it is a really competitive environment to be seeking people. And then there are the specifics in Palo Alto in both the range of issues that you've heard reported on through the work plan, which on one hand is a professional challenge. At the same time, and an opportunity for those who are interested in the field. At the same time, our expectations are really high for the ability for both individuals as well as our collective organization to be able to deliver on those priorities. And so it is a tough place to work. And I think, you know, we say that to a certain extent as a recognition that makes it even more challenging to attract candidates. And at the same time, you know, I think we wear it as a bit of a badge of honor. So there's the good and the bad of a challenging environment to operate, and all of which have made it a difficult exercise for us to recruit. I've been personally involved in seeking out individuals in order to try and encourage folks to come into the candidate pool. And proof will be in hopefully in the next several weeks where we'll be able to report on where we are.
Okay. Ms. Flaherty, would you like to add something to the city manager's comments?
I think the city manager captured it very eloquently.
Okay. So Lydia, do you want to start with some questions?
Sure.
We should mention to those at home that we're now, we've just had a presentation and we're now referencing the actual staff report.
So thank you for the presentation, and you guys have a very difficult job. So I appreciate everything that you guys are doing. I think the idea of creating the office is just for transportation is definitely a good way to go. Since, you know, the growth is going to happen and we're not provided enough resources for transportation, we do have to kind of put a little bit more effort into the transportation issues here locally. The fact that, you know, it's been a council priority in the staff report, which it mentions that's been for the past previous 6 years, says how much we really need to kind of dive in it and take it really, really, you know, I want to say seriously, and I know that all the staff has been taking this very seriously, but it's been very difficult, you know, given the growth and the reduction in parking in buildings that we've been approving. So it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. But the questions are, you know, why are we not using data published by the California Office of Transportation Safety comparing Palo Alto to other cities of similar size? I don't know if you want to answer that now or if you want to take it down and provide the answer at a later time. But I think that, metrics is I think one of the things that we really need to do is to provide benchmark data, measurements, measurement goals, systems, and then also use state data sources and accident rates, that sort of thing in order to set the benchmark. And then what you said, Chantel, about moving the needle, from there we can understand if we've moved it or not, but we need the benchmark to start off. Also, going back to the
Why
reports.
don't you let them address your data question first?
Yeah,
And then, because that's a really big one.
Yes,
And
thank
I
you.
know they've been concentrating on it.
Perhaps if I could ask clarification, is there a particular type of data that is a concern? I presume Office of Traffic Safety is typically involved with collision data, so measuring at a macro scale,
Right.
frequency of collisions per million vehicle miles or what have you. I mean, clearly
think-
that's a resource that we're very familiar with, and I believe the City of Palo Alto compares extremely well in terms of collision rates, but happy to have staff expand on that if there are any particular issues.
Actually, with all our road modifications, or rather enhancements, involving the different modes, it would be also really important to kind of recognize what other accidents, if you're saying collisions is just between car and car, that's not enough if we're doing complete streets and we're blending bicyclists onto the same roads that vehicles are on. And it's not just small vehicles, it's also lorries and dumping trucks and all sorts of other buses. There's all sorts of cars that are using our roads, and they actually enter into neighborhoods too. I see tour buses going into my neighborhood. I see them in Midtown. So neighborhood streets. So, those are some of the data I'd like to see. And I also get a lot of reports from parents whose children are going to school, and their child sometimes might get hit by a car or bumped by a car, but it's not reported. And actually, some parents have actually told me also that, we need to double check on this and see if the child kind of gets back up and goes on to school, is even a report filed. I think that's the only way we can track. So we need to make sure we track all that.
The question would be, though, if nobody reports it, I don't think we can have a data stream on it.
And yes, if they don't report it, we won't have that, but we should be encouraging people to report in order to capture that data too.
I think if a child is hurt, though, unless I'm misunderstanding this, that
That would
of course
certainly
reported,
result
yeah.
in either an emergency
Yeah.
response and as such a report being taken.
Right, if 911 is called, there's definitely a track record of that, without question.
I think to Councilmember's point, the phenomenon, or really just kind of the existence of unreported accidents, is definitely understood, and it's an issue that all communities understand, and at varying levels, obviously, depending on the resources often put or available through public safety to actually take reports. There are many communities that don't even take property damage only or some types of collision reports. And I should note, collision is a general term. It includes pedestrian, bicycle, all forms of any type of accident. But that's generally what the industry uses the term collision to reflect all the
kinds.
above. Yes.
Okay.
And so to that point, understanding that there are unreported collisions, that staff really uses that as an indicator, and as much or more so a relative indicator of conditions on one street versus another, rather than having absolute thresholds that, at a certain number of accidents that actions are triggered. I would note your earlier point on benchmarking or comparison to other statistics. I think what you're referring to really applies more to a project specific. So as Chantel mentioned, when we report back on the Bicycle Boulevard project, I think comparisons to other streets can certainly be part of that report.
Right. I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing about, Ross Road, what you said about reporting back after the year to see how that had gone. I mean, that would be very interesting to know. The other report is University Avenue corridor. I think one of the letters that came in from the public mentions that MTC had a study on it, and that was in January of this year that they released, and that it highlights issues like the corridor has accidents that are higher than state average. So all of that should be included into our reports, as well as, if there's any statewide metrics that we could kind of compare to, that might be something as well. But I think a more meatier and robust understanding of what you report back with about what our traffic situation is, that would be helpful. And then I noticed in the attachment A, I realized that we're talking about LOS and VMT again, I mean, we went through that through the comp plan, and it's come up before. And there seems to be an attempt to remove LOS, which is very much specific to local conditions, so we have a better understanding about local conditions. And I'm hoping that we're not going to eliminate it completely, but use VMT as state requires, but still keep LOS in order to have understanding specifically to what is happening locally. Then we're not just looking past what is happening here. At least give us an understanding. So I would hope that we're still going to keep LOS.
Yeah, if I may. On that one, as you mentioned, it is a state requirement in terms of CEQA impact for us to shift from LOS to VMT. So we're following the recommendations coming from a few other communities and looking at VTA's process for using that, but we still want to keep LOS. Our recommendation would still be to keep LOS as part of our local traffic impact. But when we bring the discussion of the conversion related to CEQA to council, that's something that council will be able to provide direction on.
And if I may, just for anyone who's following along at home, VMT stands for Vehicle Miles Traveled.
Thank you.
And LOS is the level of service, for example, at an intersection.
And VTA.
Well, you might expand on that a little, because what the council member is referencing is often discussed extensively. What does the state follow? Do they follow VMT? Do they follow LOS? What really makes sense, and so forth. So whichever one of you, maybe, sir, you would like to weigh in. I know you've got a lot of background in that.
Sure, thank you. VMT is not really intuitive to anybody, but it is now the state way of ensuring that environmental impact reports are reported the same, and leads to the environmental impacts associated with travel. However, LOS was actually generated at the local level and is still extensively used by all local jurisdictions in order to determine the impacts on their community. So I know that Palo Alto will
And
continue.
usually given a letter grade, yeah.
Yeah, letter grade, A through F. One jurisdiction I was in went to double F and triple F.
They left out G and H.
That's Southern California. But what it is it's an indicator of the level of congestion and how you can then possibly go about mitigating it and doing other things. But again, all local jurisdictions are really continuing to use that in order to address locally how to deal with new developments or changes. So.
My recollection is it had to do with the number of seconds you were waiting at the light or whatever.
That's
indicator might be
correct.
there.
It's one of the ways to calculate LOS, or level of service, at an intersection. Freeways have it as well, and they do it by segments, the amount of delay that you have. And that is one of the strong indicators. The other way is telling you the volume at the intersection over the capacity of the intersection. The greater the volume, the more you use up in the capacity. And it is letters, but it also could be equated to numerical numbers. What matters is not exactly the letter or the numerical number, is what is acceptable for the community. And then what happens what you're going to do if a project exceeds what you find acceptable, how you're going to identify the appropriate level of mitigation.
That's interesting, because if that's the case, so if it's what the community is willing to accept the letter, and then we mitigate from that.
Correct. I believe you have a level of service in your general plan. Yeah. Virtually all jurisdictions do. And once it exceeds that target or that quality set by the community, you can then systematically, without political intervention, but really administratively, then go about seeking the appropriate mitigation.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's very good to know. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. And I completely understand, I mean, obviously the state guidelines, they want to, for implementing CEQA, oftentimes, when we do a EIR or some sort of a review, traffic is something that comes back as unavoidable, significant impact. Get around that, use the VMT, which is why LOS is so significantly needed for each community at the local level, for us to be able to gauge where we are and what is acceptable for the community. So I would really like to see that remain. So in terms of this work plan, it's great that we have the mission, but I think maybe the mission might be a little bit simpler, could be. It was, if it's something like the mission of the Office of Transportation is to improve the quality of life in Palo Alto by making all modes of transportation as safe, cost-effective, and efficient as we can. And that's about it. I don't even think we need a purpose, because that states it in the mission. In terms of looking at the goals, goal number 3 actually should be goal number 1. It might not be any, you might not be looking at which one is first, but I think for many of us, you set your goal and you're trying to accomplish that first one. So goal number 3 is to increase the professional capacity of the members of the Office of Transportation, right? So I think in order for it to work, we need that office to be filled, so that is going to be a priority to do. And at the same time, under the 2 bullet points, I would add in there to provide the existing benchmark, because while we're looking for the 2 heads of transportation office, we could be putting all those numbers together too, to get it started. And then on the other 2 goals, on your goal number 1, said provide, design, and implement transportation services that meet and exceed the expectation. I think at this point we just want to meet, so I was thinking, wow. So we want to meet the expectations. And then when you say encourage transportation alternatives, to single occupancy vehicles, you have to provide other means of transportation, and it can't be just bicycle and walking. So I think it'd be really necessary to also have, what are the other modes, of connecting shuttles to the train, to other shuttles, to the Marguerite, making sure that every segment is addressed. So I don't know how to write that one, but I was thinking encourage transportation alternatives, but also we have a lot of holes in between. And then on your objective, the first bullet, improve traffic flow and safety on major streets. I think it has to be all streets, including the neighborhood streets, arterials, and what's that other street that you guys have that is? Collectors. Collectors, yes, thank you. I've been thinking about that all day. So we have safety in there a lot, but I also want to make sure that we address circulation and flow. We want to keep traffic flowing, and the reason I bring that up is because at one of the community meetings for Charleston and Arostadero, one of the traffic engineers, when I went to ask him, there was a method that he was describing, and he said, this is, it's not, and it was a F, the intersection was already a F, and I said, so how is that going to relieve it from making it any better? He said, it's not going to, but the thing is, it's going to stop, it's going to at least make traffic slower. But when you have traffic come to a standstill, then we have a problem there also. So I'm hoping that we can look into ensuring that there's a flow. I was reading another transportation thing, and I'm no transportation engineer, which is I was researching a lot, is that there's the 3 E's for anything to be successful. So on this, we obviously have the engineering, but I don't see anything about the education and the enforcement in here. So if we're going to have a work plan, I think it's necessary to put in there the education and the enforcement. I know Safe Route to Schools is doing a lot of education there, so that's great. But I think that we need to also do education among the adults to understand that there is a need to share the road and to follow stop sign rules, because they blow stop signs more than anything. Right. So let me see. Oh, in terms of the scooter and we have the pilot programs, and I know you're drawing up the guidelines, but maybe we can start thinking ahead of that and have enforcement in there as well, and what are the rules and education on it, ensuring that, I still don't know if they're allowed. I mean, certain places bicycles are allowed on the pavement, sidewalks, and then certain places they're not. Same for the scooters and skateboarders and all that. Are we sharing the sidewalks or not? I think that's something that needs to be better understood amongst all the people who use the road, so we're not having accidents. I'd also like to say that a lot of the activity that we've done has been through resident stakeholder groups. So it would be really nice to either have a resident stakeholder group in order to help flush out things within the neighborhoods, and to advise.
You know what you could do is, on the night that we discuss this, you can bring that up and see if there's support from it, but ask Eric in particular if he wants to appoint something like that.
So do we put it on this
No,
work?
just bring it up that night. This is how it's all going to work. We haven't discussed yet whether or not there will be a group that oversees what frankly isn't even in place yet. So I don't know when you think, Chantel, we may actually have all of this functional, another year, realistically?
I think we'll be implementing it sort of throughout this year, so I'm not sure if there's
So
like a
it's going to be
destination
in
point.
increments,
Exactly,
little by
yeah.
little by little, right?
Exactly. So some of these things, given the items that are coming to council and given when we bring in staff, will be happening. As an example, we have sort of stakeholder engagement involved in each of the projects as an example. So with the RPP report coming to council on Monday, part of that discussion is thinking about where and how we involve stakeholders regarding some of those recommendations. So I think for individual topics, it definitely is something that we have different parts of community engagement on, and that kind of is a factor. Ed, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I was just going to note that that's a good example. So here we have before you the work plan. A piece of it will be going to council next week, which is the RPP. Also, there will be ongoing discussion on rail. So there are kind of simultaneous movement on different parts of the overall traffic and transportation work plan, not the least of which the text around the goals, the mission and purpose of the office are also part of the budget. So lots of these things are going in parallel, as are the 2 position ads that Chantal mentioned. So one question that the committee may want to consider is, when should the work plan go to council? As you noted, much of this is work in place or work in progress, and it could either go now, where some of the discussion may be exactly as you're having tonight. When will this actually be in place, and when will we be positioned to actually execute on it? An alternative would be we bring it to council in August, by which time the council will have acted on the positions and hopefully approved, and so we'll be able to more confidently say, hey, we're moving on it.
The
as well as
position of the two
The 2 new
positions.
Yes, yes. So by that time, hopefully we will be moving on recruitment for those 2 positions, in addition to having filled chief transportation official by that time. So and again, I'm not suggesting we keep it in committee until August, but I do think that's something for you to consider, because we do have a number of things that are in the works that will change between June and August.
So one thing, Lydia, if we can just go back and forth with questions for a minute, is I am very sympathetic to the discussion about the sidewalk and who can use the sidewalk. It's difficult if you have lots of other rollers on the sidewalk other than your feet. So I am concerned about that. My daughter lives in Santa Monica, where scooters have become an irritant at best. And people do get around on them, and it's very effective. But they tend to leave them places, and they frequently just end up on somebody's lawn, or they end up out in the street, and there's been a big uproar about it there. We were just in Austin, though, where they use the scooters much more effectively. I don't know why, maybe just better education, as you mentioned, Lydia, that people, either that or they're more responsible. I don't know which it is. But there didn't seem to be I didn't hear the same outcry as I've heard down in Santa Monica. But I think you're absolutely right. Do scooters go on a sidewalk? I hope not.
I just want it defined, right? So
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
a clear understanding of,
Where they go.
what modes are where and what is allowed on sidewalks and not allowed on sidewalks, so that at least people who are walking and those that are disabled can remain safe.
Well, and I think in some instances, some of that is being handled at the state level so that we don't have to create case-by-case rules about that from city to city.
Thank you for the reminder.
So we have that as well.
And the
Thanks.
I don't know when the state one would come around. If we could just have our own, if we're going to have these modes of transportation on our roads, we should have some basic rules until state comes around. They tend to work a little bit slower.
Well, they may already
on
have them in place,
transportation.
though. I think they're already in place.
They are in
Lydia,
place,
yeah.
okay.
And the benefit of not being the first in regards to the bike and scooter share is we are actively learning from every other community. We're always happy when we are in the first role, but this is one where we're really benefiting from not being the first community. So to your point about Austin and Santa Monica, we have looked at each of their programs, and in the guidelines we're creating, we're really trying to build accountability into the permit where we allow people to come here at all. So thinking about where they can allow the scooters to be left and the enforcement aspect and putting more onus on the actual companies. We are learning that the communities that do lean towards more responsibility for the companies in the earlier phases actually have more success than those that just say, great, come to our city, do whatever you want, and then try to retroactively fix it. It's very difficult. So we're being very meticulous and learning from all of the other communities in our guideline approach.
Thanks. Thank goodness. I know it sounds like I haven't been in town, but we also happened to be in Philadelphia not that long ago, where they're not allowing them yet. If you remember Philadelphia, they have narrow streets, and it's an old, yeah, and it's an old town where I think that it would be really awkward to have them, but I'm very sympathetic with that. And also, there are a number of sidewalks, even in Palo Alto, where it says walk your bike, so that you know you're safe in that situation. Because we're trying to be as multimodal as we can be. So one thing that you mentioned, Lydia, I want to pick up on, the shuttles. Our shuttle, which we've had for years, still is kind of a mystery to lots of people as to where to pick it up, where it goes, how often it runs. Can we address that in this particular plan? I don't know now if I go on our website and I zoom onto shuttles, what I'm going to find. Am I going to get really accurate information about where I can find a shuttle and what time?
I believe so. I haven't clicked on our shuttle page for a while, so full disclosure there.
Clearly, I haven't either, yeah.
We are doing an RFP right now to do a new shuttle contract. We're bringing to council a 6-month extension of the current contract so that we have a buffer room to really be able to evaluate the proposals. So the current contract ends at the end of June, and we're trying to extend it to the end of the year. That'll give us more time to really holistically look at all of the proposals that we receive and making sure we have room in case we don't receive as many quality proposals to be able to have some space around that before the contract is completely over. So I am hoping that in a new shuttle provider that we'll be able to address some of the issues that we have seen over the last year. We've had some issues related to our shuttle, and we want to factor that into the new RFP, especially for the crosstown shuttles.
Also, I'm on the BTA policy group, and I heard at their last meeting that they are not going to cut the service that they were going to cut to Palo Alto. Remember, there was a discussion about whether or not it'd be 24 hours a day, so that will continue on I think it's the 22. And also, it sounds as though they'll continue the good service to gun that has existed. And I also think the Pali kids often I think they take the shuttle. Certainly middle school takes the shuttle, but I know that Pali kids, if they're not old enough to drive, will take the shuttle as well. But the older you get, I think, the less you want to take the shuttle because you don't want to be like the little kids and take the shuttle. So what else, Lydia, did you find?
The regional TMA, I really encourage that, I really encourage the leaders of each of the communities here to kind of really look at the regional part of it. And I don't know if there's anything that you can report on that, Michelle?
Yes, the Joint Venture Silicon Valley has begun convening a series of discussions that they're referring to as the Manzanita Talks, and Palo Alto is being represented at those by Mayor Phil Seth.
And is it early on right now?
Yes, they've had one meeting so far, and their next meeting will involve a field trip to Contra Costa County to visit the TMA there.
And then how about Palo Alto's TMA? How's that coming along? Do you see it? I mean, obviously, that's one part of having a successful transportation plan. Where do you see that at this point?
Yes, I think they did a nice job with their annual presentation to the council in January, or February, rather. And they presented to the Finance Committee last month with a request for an increase in the level of funding from the city, which will be factored into the budget process, that request, and be coming forward through the budget hearings.
So it looks like it's still difficult for them to fund itself without the city. Do they have the wherewithal to continue?
The majority of the budget continues to come from the city. The city has been contributing over $400,000 a year to the TMA, and they have raised another $100,000 from private contributors. But that's about, I'm rounding off, but that's the only other funding, and those were one-time funds.
Okay. Yes.
Just Were we discussing TMAs today? Yes. So maybe you could talk about that for just a minute, because all TMAs, it turns out, are not created equal. So if you might say something about that, because different cities look at them differently.
Yes, part of the conversations that are coming up with the Manzanita talks, we're realizing even more that every TMA can be created a little bit differently. And I'm still looking to Michelle so she can add any extra color commentary. But so part of that discussion is really thinking through what the Palo Alto TMA can grow into and what it will be. We see it as part of our ecosystem here for transportation alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. The details of the exact things of the TMA, I think, is the pieces that Michelle, being on the board there, can fill in a little more.
The agency that the TMA contracts with for its executive director, Altrans, did some research for the TMA that has been shared with the transportation staff, where they've taken a look at the different a sampling, not a comprehensive, exhaustive research project, but a sampling of TMAs and different models for TMAs. So depending on the model of the TMA, you might have different funding sources. You might have a district with a tax that funds a TMA, for example. Some TMAs are funded almost entirely from the business community. So there are a lot of different funding mechanisms, and depending on the funding mechanism, the types of services that are provided really vary. So for example, TMAs that are mostly funded by the business community tend to operate more shuttles that serve the employers that are paying for them. And one of the things that are attractive to them is less stops, because the reason people like shuttles is they don't stop every few blocks like public buses do. And so you get a more express service. So trying to find that balance between how many are getting the service and how express the service is one of those sweet spots that everybody who's paying in is trying to get a piece of. And so that's one of the things that has to be factored in, for example. So looking at some of that different research in the different funding models that are out there and the different services that are available, the local TMA is taking a look at that and trying to reconcile that with the current model that the Palo Alto TMA is using. So the Palo Alto TMA was tasked by starting with focusing on downtown. And there are not a lot of single large employers downtown, so you wouldn't fund it like you would a TMA where a handful of very large employers are paying into an employer shuttle. It's a different approach, which is why the approach that the Palo Alto TMA has used is focusing on service workers in the downtown area and trying to subsidize transit use for those service workers. So instead of running a shuttle, those folks are getting Caltrain passes or carpool services.
On the TMAs, because a lot of the ride shares, they're through private companies, right? And then when they start getting the business going, how do we address when they raise their prices?
I'm sorry, when who raises their prices?
You know, I don't want to say the companies' names because I don't want to advertise for them.
Okay, yeah, the TMA has been moving between 2 and 3 different rideshare providers and continues to be fluid in how it manages those relationships based on what kind of a price it can get for those services.
So those companies have not really kind of increased substantially in any way that would make it not viable for them to be.
The TMA stopped using one company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our TMA.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I hadn't realized until we had that discussion today, though, how different they were, that Mountain View's is quite different from ours. And we've talked so much about trying to do a regional one, which I presume is what the Manzanita discussions are addressing, right? Is how can we pull this all together? So they're going to go and look at a couple of others that exist, which is how we started this to begin with. Then Councilmember Nancy Shepherd and I went to, I think, to Concord, where they had a type of research park and where it was extremely successful, and they had done a great job with it. And that was the first time we had seen something that was like a TMA. And I think, again, and probably it's easier at the Stanford Research Park because there are those big employers, and they can tap into their resources. Yeah. So, we're working hard, I know, at the downtown TMA, and it's been uphill. So,
It has. I believe in their report to the council, they demonstrated that their analysis shows the TMA is taking an average of 333 cars off the street per month. But that was at an accelerated level of expenditure, so they front-loaded some of their money. They can't sustain that level of performance based on their current funding levels. So they'll throttle back down to something below 300 as an estimate.
I had to be in San Jose this morning at 9:30, and for a good shot at what's actually going on in the Bay Area, drive from Palo Alto down to downtown San Jose at about 9 o'clock, and it's rather astonishing. It's almost a complete stream of cars all the way going south. Going north. I was very glad I was going south.
South, yeah, you're going the
Yeah,
other
that's a good
traffic.
segment to go south.
Yeah.
The absolutely worst turnoff is Amphitheater, I think, or, right where Google is, obviously. And, yeah, I thought more TMA needed because there was such a string. So Lydia, what else?
Thank you for your
What else are you
indulgence.
seeing?
So the TDM ordinance, I see that it's on your attachment A work item for fall of this year. I just want to make sure that, that is, all of these kind of programs, it's important in order to all work together in order to lower the traffic. So the ordinance, in the past when I've asked to look at the ordinance, it was very hard to find where they are because I don't know how the filing system is done. So I'm hoping that this time around it's a little bit different and it's easy to get to. And of course, again, enforcement is another part of it to make sure that we do have robust one. And there should be some sticks in it.
We are thinking through that. If you recall, in the transportation impact fee item that came to City Council, the TDM is one of the pieces where a proposed development could reduce essentially what they would have to pay in a transportation impact fee if they are factoring in TDM and show some real ways that they are going to reduce the number of trips. And so in our looking at the TDM ordinance, we're figuring, we have a better system in place now where we have a way that we can check annually and be able to follow through and make sure that they're meeting those requirements ongoing. And also building it in such a way that it works in tandem with all these other things that we have factored in. So I think it will be stronger than what it is today.
Yeah, because when I look at some of the TDM agreements, having showers is part of a bullet point for what a TDM is, and then having storage for bicycles is another one. But we never know if there's any bicycles that are actually stored in there, and your showers, are they being used because people need a shower, but not really because they rode their bicycle over there and they're sweaty? So, those kind of measurements are, to work with is, it doesn't seem real to me. So I think, let's have more practical things in there. And I don't know what they are because I have not seen any TDMs before that actually made sense to me. That was just an example.
I think your point about the challenge of performance metrics is, one that we'll continue to grapple with. There's so much data that we'd love to have.
Yeah.
That's really,
And
really hard to
how?
gather.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you wanted to know how many people rode their bikes, like how would you gather that data? So we continue to grapple with that in all departments on all performance metrics where there's things we'd love to know, but in either we don't have access to the data or we don't have an infrastructure to collect it. So we're continuing to inch towards some of those over time.
I appreciate that. I realize how difficult it is because, I mean, even Caltrain, you know, you have the card and I forget what it's called.
Clipper?
Yeah, but it's just when you register for it, then you know that person registered for it, but you don't know if they're using it or not, you know, so there's no real measurements in there. So then how do you even come out and say, yes, we took another car off the road, and when you don't really know if they're actually using the card or not. And a lot of this are given to them for free, right? Right, so that's just, oh, we gave another one away. We have so many cards that we've given away, but there's no tracking of are they actually using it, which is why it's sometimes hard for me to follow the data. Are they skewed? In terms of what Ed had just said about, you know, when to look at this plan at council, I'm kind of thinking that, you know, if we kind of bring it forward now, it won't have the chief transportation officer, we won't have them here yet. And obviously, we want to include them in our plan so that they're not just forced into the plan, you know, at least, you know, they get to kind of say, oh, let's think about this a little bit differently or kind of change it around a little bit. So I kind of wonder, you know, if this is.
So maybe August would be better.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree.
I definitely want them to be included in the discussion, right?
No, I think that's a decision. Yeah, wait till August. It will have cooked a little more.
And it is going to come to council for discussion as an action item and not so much as a consent calendar item?
Oh, no, this will be an absolute action item, right. We haven't done anything of this magnitude in a long time. This is really taking one of our priorities and making it, you know, as you said, robust. This one is a really all-inclusive.
Also make it accountable too, you know, because we have to be accountable to our citizens in terms of ensuring that we're actually living up to making sure we address this priority. It's been 6 years.
If I might, on that note, just really acknowledge the council's action on this, and this, I think, really does reflect taking this priority and taking it a step farther than we have in the past as far as the council priorities and then turning it into a work plan that the committee and the council will ultimately discuss. So I believe certainly from staff's perspective, this is also really helpful to make clear what the specific actions will be as a result of the council action, council prioritization.
But Ed, you realize that with our pushing it back to August, it means that you have to hire somebody.
Believe me,
By
yes,
July,
that's my priority as well.
And you,
Chantel.
you've been working on that one for a while.
Yes.
So 2 or 3 other things, and you won't be surprised to hear these. I really hope that the parking system, which is listed on June 3rd, is actually going to materialize.
The Duncan project.
Well, if that's the one that is going to put in the sensors that indicates where there are spots available, or is that not that same one?
That's a different one.
So when, it's been, I think now 5 years since I made a motion on it. When
In June.
in June, we're actually going to have
No.
that kind of information?
In June, a contract will be brought for the consideration of the city council. It'll be an amendment to an existing contract, new scope of work by Dixon. And one of the 2 tasks that they'll have will include exactly what you're talking about. They'll come up with what they're calling a proposed pilot on that they could use to ultimately test the system at the lowest cost for Palo Alto. And I think the city manager had also wanted to ensure that possible other options for the delivery of that service are being considered, and maybe he'd like to speak to that?
Just to note that we are talking to the business community and the bid specifically as to whether they might be interested in taking the lead on the project on delivery. And, you know, I think it's important to point out that the red light, green light parking availability signage was a part of the garage that we now have on hold at Waverly and Hamilton. And so we're refocusing the activity of the staff that were working on that in order to deliver this system in the near term.
Is this system that you're talking about the parking space inside the garage where it's available?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The one that, I literally made a motion on it, I think, in 2014.
Is it called wayfinding? What is it called?
No, it has a name, but what is the correct name for it?
Well,
I've heard various terms,
yeah,
parking
it's just a
occupancy,
parking
signage.
occupancy availability.
I guess that's the easiest, parking occupancy availability.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And
So-
on your attachment A, this is the last parking item where you see Dixon contract amendment.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know which one it
Yeah.
was.
Yep.
That's
So
it.
that's the, and any even tentative date for when it might be in place? This year?
I can't respond to that. In conversations, though, with Ms. Dixon, she had indicated that there is a lower-cost way with which you could do a pilot and test it, rather than going to a full-blown, large electronic system. And that's what she's going to be focusing in on. And I believe that's what we'll be discussing in a bit more detail in that report that would be coming to council in June.
Since I don't know anything about it whatsoever as far as what the other one contract versus another, I'm going to have to guess somebody made a decision to go with the lower cost one?
No,
Or
this
they
type.
did?
Well, this type of system is installed in other jurisdictions. It's very expensive, though. It requires a lot of sensors and other things to provide information. Julie has experience in this area, and she's saying that rather than for the city of Palo Alto to move and make that type of capital investment, she would like to bring forward another option that could be done much more quickly, much more economically, that may derive the same benefit that the city could see. And I did not get into detail as to exactly what that looked like, but that's what she'll have in her proposal, again, that's anticipated to come forward to council in June.
If I could add, I think one of the considerations, and Wayne and I haven't talked about the specifics, much less with Dixon, but it's to ensure that we have the ongoing expectation of operating and maintaining the system. So it's important that we not just put it in and assume that it's going to work flawlessly, certainly not at the beginning or on go-forward basis. So as a result, when we look at how best to procure the system, we'll also work through the issues of making sure we have either staff or contract capacity to run it once it's up, because that is really the essence of systems like this. They need to be accurate in order to maintain credibility with the public. So that'll be an important part of the work we have ahead.
It does seem as though a number of other cities have these and they work quite well. So I've always been puzzled about why we could take quite so long to do this. Some of the other things that are here, on Middlefield North, you're going to bring us another plan. I'm not quite understanding what that's about on Middlefield North.
Yes, so when the city council recently adopted this, and Raphael is available, that he can answer more too. When city council adopted it, we said that we would go to PTC and provide an update on the materials we'll use. So it's an informational just update for them, because we've already had the approval from council. So we want to just keep PTC informed,
Oh,
but that's
okay.
what this item is. It's
It's
very
not coming
light.
back to us again.
Correct.
Good,
And
okay.
even from my discussions with staff, there are very limited types of materials that we can even use. So it's really narrow in scope in terms of what we'll be presenting on, just saying like, here's what we found and here's the materials that we'll be installing.
So this,
Okay.
it's installation of something, not so
yeah.
much a report about accident rates and.
Correct.
And, oh, okay.
It's about the permanent materials being installed.
Oh, okay.
And so one other thing, the Emergency Now Signal Preemption Project, I don't know if I know what that is.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Rafael Reyes, Traffic Engineering Lead. The emergency.now system is an emergency vehicle preemption system for the traffic signals, which will allow our emergency response vehicles, fire trucks, to get signal priority. But the system, historically, the system's typically like an infrared emitter on a vehicle that notifies a signal, but this would all be dispatch and GIS based, so the signals would give priority to fire trucks all along the route, even around turns coming up, to have advanced priority, and can also clear traffic that might be queued up on a street ahead of before the truck even gets onto that street. So, but this project is being led by our fire department.
Okay,
But
good.
it'll be a
I
joint.
hadn't heard about it before,
office.
but I totally understand what you're talking about. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of it. What do you think?
We have, just one last thing is, institute a revised community engagement process for transportation projects. How do you, what do you envision? Well, how will it be different from what you're doing now? What are you doing now?
It's a good question, because Chantel has found herself in an unusual position.
There are so many angles at which we can address that question, so I was picking one. We are using some of the lessons learned from recent projects as guidance for us in thinking about what may be more useful for future projects in terms of outreach and community engagement. So part of, as an example, the Ross Rowe follow-up report that's coming in August, we really are going to look at the ways that outreach was done, when it was done, and really think about if there were better opportunities for us in that project specifically, for example, and then using some of that information as guidance for us in thinking about what is the best way and best times to do engagement for the different projects. So using the Ross Road one as an example, staying with that one, some people mentioned it would be nice if we had some of the temporary things, at least some more visuals earlier on, so that they can better understand what was being proposed. It sounded great, but then when they saw it, they were like, I'm not sure that's what I thought it was going to be. So thinking through what's a really good way for us to be able to bring the community along and the different access points that people come into a project, so that we can make sure that there's full understanding of what will be changing, and make sure that we're reflecting the desired changes with our different projects. Ed, did you want to add anything to that?
Going to offer or invite Wayne to also comment, since he's done some initial work actually at the time of the Ross Road project. Anything you want to share?
Well, obviously, things didn't go really good on Ross Road.
So it starts with more in terms of engagement. Yeah.
I wondered how you could say that. Okay.
That's why we hire a consultant, so you can say
Yeah,
stuff we're too afraid to.
Do we put that under lessons learned?
Yes.
Absolutely.
But Ross Road, as you know, isn't done. We'll be coming back for potential modifications, adjustments, and then actually Phase 2 is in a queue. And there are many other transportation projects that are coming forward that all have the eye of the community, really the attention. In fact, it doesn't almost matter whatever it is. It falls under a great deal of scrutiny. And so the
We are like that as a community.
Okay, I've learned.
Yes.
Whereas we had thought we would come up with a community engagement process for the next Bicycle Boulevard. Thought was, well, there are so many other things going on, should we also be looking at what is the appropriate level of engagement in all of the things we do? Rather than say, well, we didn't hit that one, the nail on the head, and have to redo it, and having to provide excuses or so. We don't want to do that. So the focus really is to really have a system in place that the council could take a look at, say, maybe there are some things that you need to augment here to go about doing that. And I guess one could even apply it to other projects that the city is engaged in that have a lot of scrutiny. But transportation is the one that we would like to develop a system for. And we have given some thought to it on things that would go into it, but it's going to really be, I think, vetted very much by the city manager's office and ultimately by the city council.
You know, the community engagement that you guys have been doing with the Crescent Park folks, you know, that appears to be some very positive. I don't know, is that what you're getting? Who has been the lead worker, connect liaison with the Crescent Park folks? You, Raphael?
Yeah, so myself and another engineer, we've primarily been in contact. There's similar to Middlefield North, there's, I would say, one person that's really taking the lead as a neighborhood and has a lot of personal contacts with their neighbors. And we've been working with them to develop, you know, our preliminary concepts. We're still early in the Crescent Park process, and our next steps are to take what we've heard from a handful, we call it the stakeholder group, and then take it to a community meeting and the Planning and Transportation Commission next, to finalize concepts for a pilot project that we would eventually take to City Council.
So from there, will you be, you know, as a pilot project, is it going to be what you did, Ed, for Charleston, Arastadero, with the temporary stuff, so that all the people who live close by gets to kind of try it out and like it?
We could do that. For Crescent Park, we were imagining something a little bit closer to what we did for Middlefield North, a little bit more permanent than the hay wattles that were used. In Middlefield North, there were rubber and plastic materials that were bolted down, and you know, they've been there for a couple years now, kind of in poor condition, need to be replaced. But it would be a little bit like semi-permanent materials, more plastic type materials. And then if it's kept for the long term, could eventually be replaced with concrete or other materials. But
There was a name for that. Remind me again, Ed, what's the name?
Oh, you used the term tactical urbanism, but
Yes, right, thank you.
yes. And so I think kind of bottom line for what Raphael was describing, it is still temporary, but just a little more fixed, and so it won't move around like we had with the hay wattles, you called those? I don't know if you remember that term.
I think there are straw wattles or
I think the
Hay
other
bales.
part that came up, that actually was one of the lessons that we were learning through the Russ Road, like Boulevard project, is putting something temporary to let people see it,
Right.
understand it, respond to it before more permanent things
Right.
come. So that was one that was the middle of the road piece of it for Ross Road, but it was something that was then helpful and we used for Charleston Arastadero and some of our other neighborhood traffic safety
Sort of try
projects.
before you buy, right?
A little bit
Yeah.
of that, yes.
I think they have to experience it. People just have to experience using it before they recognize whether it's something that is doable or not. I also noticed that in the Crescent Park plan, there was a drawing of a zebra crossing on University, and I forget what is the crossroad. There was a zebra crossing.
Cross Street,
Huh?
there was a zebra at a
At
university
and I don't
like
remember.
Chaucer or one of those.
Yeah, one of those. And, you know, given University, I don't remember if there was a curve at the University part. So will there be lights over there flashing to say there's pedestrian crossing? You know, just for safety, because I don't know how.
I don't know which crossing on University. I mean, might it be Middlefield North project at
Because there was a drawing
Hawthorne?
that I saw. Anyway,
On
I was
Middlefield
just-
and Hawthorne, we added, we call it high visibility crosswalk at Hawthorne crossing Middlefield.
okay. And I was just wondering if at University, just because it's a much more used street, you know, if that's what you guys are, if that's what is going to go in over there. And I noticed there's a roundabout,
On University Avenue?
no,
Oh,
Hamilton.
that would be a surprise.
One of the ideas,
On
Hamilton.
Hamilton, on Hamilton somewhere?
Yes, there was,
Actually, that one is a really big area, so
Yeah.
it actually works out, I think, but
Hamilton and what?
Hamilton Center,
would,
Southwood.
Yeah.
It's a
yeah,
five-leg intersection.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
with a
that's an awkward
pretty
one.
wide.
Yeah.
One of the options is for a temporary trial, I'd call it a traffic circle more than a roundabout, which wouldn't change the stop control essentially. I mean, it would keep the existing stop control at all the approaches. A roundabout is often replacing stop signs with yield signs. That's one of two options I think we're going to look at for that location, bring to the community. So.
I like that, the roundabout idea. But let me just throw one thing in, because for a long time I have thought, and it's because I don't know what's happening down at the University Woodland crossing on a regular basis, other than it's just, you know, a melee there. But it would seem as though if the problem was University Avenue, you could make it 2 lanes out in the afternoon and 2 lanes in the morning, because you could make it 3 lanes pretty easily, like Embarcadero already is. Could you take a look at that and just get back to us at some time? Is that totally outrageous and you couldn't possibly do it? You'd have to do it with cones. You couldn't do it any other way that I can see, and make it, you know, a temporary. But is the real problem not the getting out on University Avenue, or is it really getting through that intersection at Woodland and University?
So I think you're referring to, I know in Santa Clara there's one, like a center lane that becomes a reversible lane depending on the commute
Right,
direction.
Yeah, or on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, and the
or-
Golden Gate Bridge
Yeah,
too.
many places, yeah.
It's just my opinion, but I think the congestion is really related to the Woodland intersection, and it's,
And if that's the case, then it's not even worth any more discussion, because I'm not sure that the citizens in that area would find that appealing.
yeah.
But it is a system that's used many places if it's about simply that stretch of University, which ends, you know, at
Sure.
Middlefield and Woodland.
And
I don't even think it's a mile, is it, from
do you know the?
Middlefield down to Woodland?
I wouldn't imagine it's not. I know that's my normal commute life, so I know some of it just depends on the corridor itself. So the backup that we have between essentially Chaucer and Woodland, that's a bunch of the Palo
That's
Alto
probably
part of the backup.
The worst area.
It is reflective of what happens at the Woodland Light, but also beyond the Woodland Light as you're going through the entire community of East Palo Alto up to the Dumbarton Bridge. A lot of that is where the traffic is going, and it depends on the flow. So one of the projects that we've done with MTC in collaboration with East Palo Alto is looking at signal timing. And that I do believe will make a small difference, not a huge difference, but for corridor timing, at least trying to sync it a little bit better. But it'll just depend on the volumes going through essentially the rest of the neighboring
It's really a nightmare of an
community.
intersection. And I think that's the kind of thing that the communities all need to look at that together with whatever terrific traffic officer you find. So how you would straighten that out, I don't know. You're essentially dealing with Menlo Park, East Palo Alto,
Caltrans.
a state highway, you know, it's just, you know, I couldn't imagine finding some solution to it, but I think we have to do that.
actually, there's a state bill that is being proposed that Caltrans looks into all the signal operation, and they call it optimization also. So hopefully that goes through.
So actually, yeah, Chantal's right. We're actually just implemented the testing for the coordination. So for the longest time, right after Woodland are the US 101 ramps signals, and a lot of times the congestion is when they didn't sync up, and as soon as Woodland turns green for Palo Alto, the ramp's red. so as of, I want to say April 23rd, I believe, was when we just turned on a synchronization project, and they're in the process of testing and tweaking it right now, so.
And the other,
That's good to know.
the
Good.
other piece.
Hope lies ahead.
Yes, hope lies ahead, and also in exciting news department is East Palo Alto's Bike and Pedestrian Bridge will be opening up in another week. I believe they're opening it on May 18th. And for people like me, there are a few of us that are within reach, and it really can make a difference for someone if they feel like it's safe to get across 101. It could potentially contribute to some more mode shift people that will consider getting out of their vehicle. So it's every piece of the ecosystem that really matters.
One more question is, you have the citywide traffic signal operations optimization. This is for Palo Alto, but there is conversations going on with our neighboring cities to work with them to optimize so that it's not just cut off for us and then or for them.
And we do talk with our neighboring cities, especially with the county that operates like Oregon and Page Mill and Foothill Expressways. As far as coordinating signals, Woodland's actually not a Palo Alto signal, that's East Palo Alto, but I would say this is the first time we're actually doing a cross-jurisdiction coordination together. It would be University Avenue.
So how about on the other south side?
On the south side, we don't.
San Antonio?
San Antonio, we end right at NITA, and so then it goes over the Caltrain tracks, and it's the distance. I believe it's California Avenue or in Mountain View, where the milk pail market used to be. That's the first Mountain View intersection, and that's a pretty good distance where synchronization might not make it
Necessary.
might not be necessary. And also heading south on Charleston, the first intersection is Independence, where Best Buy is. It's also a pretty significant distance away from San Antonio.
You know, one of the, at least in my opinion, because I live fairly close to Oregon, that flows pretty well. I don't know if you all are down in that direction at all in the morning, but they tend to have, the signalization is long. So if you're waiting to try and cross Oregon, it takes a while. But the traffic flows pretty well, and that's heavy in the morning. Just for a study of what might work. That's 2 lanes both directions. But they studied that one for 2 or 3 years before they put it in. And it's functioning pretty well.
Oregon is Palo Alto's?
No, it's maintained by the county. And
Page Mill is Palo Alto's?
no, also the county. So all the expressways in general, like all over Santa Clara County, if it's an expressway, except for Page Mill Road, I think it's the only. But still considered an expressway. Those are all maintained by the county, and the county did, I think it was 2008 to 2012, did do extensive upgrades to the cross streets at like Greer and Lewis in Middlefield to add left turn.
A lot of meetings with the residents.
To add protected left turn lanes to also improve pedestrian safety. But as part of that, they did the synchronization, and they run a traffic responsive timing, so it changes as depending on what they did on the demands.
Yeah, so, but it was an expensive project and a long time coming. So do you think we can send this on to the full? No, we're not going to send it on yet, are we? Well, we're going to keep it in committee till August?
You could do that, or you could give us instructions to bring it to council in August. Either would be fine.
Why don't we do that? Would you like to move that?
I move that you bring it to council in August
As an action item, right?
as an
Yeah.
action item.
Very
Yes,
good.
thank you.
Okay, I second it, and it looks as though that will pass. It's a lot easier with 2, isn't it?
Well, I want to thank you
Anyhow,
for all your work on this and moving this forward as a top priority. Thank you.
And just to mention future meetings and agendas, I saw one, as we're going forward, on attachment A, you have one listed for board,
Parking audit?
Yes, I saw it in here somewhere. What is our,
Yes,
what's
we
the
have-
discussion at our next meeting?
Yes, for our June meeting, we'll be doing audits, a
Oh,
whole
okay.
list of
So
audit
you've got a whole lot
reports.
of audits for June?
Yes, we've
Okay.
got 2 months, what had originally been scheduled to come in across 2 different P&S meetings, we're going to try to lump them all together in one and just commit the whole meeting to audit reports.
Who is we?
Your mic's not on.
Transportation, the parking funds is one of many audits that'll come on that day.
Oh, okay, good, good. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Irma, for holding down the clerk's assignment for tonight.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned. And I will tell you something very quietly. So I thought, okay, I'll just